Parshas Korach describes Korach's rebellion against his cousins, Moshe and Aaron. He claims that they have arrogated to themselves a disproportionate level of leadership. And he garners the support of 250 important men, leaders, among the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. And they gather against Moshe and Aaron, and they make their claims. And Moshe is not happy. And he says, okay, we're going to do a test. It's kind of echoes the test that Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, performed with the Nevi'ei HaBaal, prophets of the Baal, on Mount Carmel, where he says, well, we'll see whose sacrifice is accepted. So his test is everybody gets a pan and fills it with incense, and then we'll see what happens. And in the middle of this, the Almighty appears, his glory appears, and he says to Moshe and to Aaron, separate yourselves, step back, mitoch ha'edah azos, from this edah. Edah is congregation. V'achale osam koraga, and I will wipe them out immediately. Now what had happened is that before this statement, the Torah describes that apparently everybody, not just the 250 men, but they all gathered around to see what's the ruckus, what's going on. Let's see who wins. It sounds like, evidently to Moshe, it sounds like God is threatening to wipe out all of Israel because they've all gathered around nominally, or at least apparently, in support of Korach's rebellion. Some may have been curious. Some may have even been rooting for Moshe, but they were there to watch what was going on. And Moshe and Aaron respond to God's warning. And they say, it said, the verse says, Vayiplu apneihem, they fell on their faces, they prayed to God. Vayomru, and they said, Kel Elokei haruchos l'chol basar, God, the God of the spirits of all flesh. One man sins, and you will take out your anger on the entire congregation. So what is this Elokei haruchos l'chol basar, the God of the spirits of all flesh? The verse could have been well understood without those words. They simply could have said, Vayamru Kel, God, one man sins, are you going to take out your anger on everybody? What's this phrase, Elokei haruchos l'chol basar? So we look at Rashi, and Rashi says, Elokei haruchos, the God of the spirits of every flesh. That means Yodea machashavos. Rashi says, you know their thoughts. Ein midascha k'midas basar v'dam. Your attributes are not like those of flesh and blood. Melech basar v'dam, a king of flesh and blood. Shesorcha alav miktsas medina, that a portion of the state, of the population, rebels. En yodea mi hachote, he doesn't know who it was, so therefore lefikach shu koes nifro mikula. So then when he gets angry, he punishes all of them. Avalata, but you, lefanecha geluyos kol hamachshavos, before you are revealed all of the thoughts, v'yodea ata miachote, and you know who's truly the sinner. So if one man sins, are you going to take it out on everybody? You know their thoughts. Question is, what does that have to do with ruchos? What does that have to do with Elokei haruchos l'chol basar? Could have been Yodei machshavos, could have been perhaps bochen levavos, somebody who, God who tests the hearts. What's this phrase of Elokei ruchos? Well, it shows up. The exact same phrase, Elokei ruchos l'chol basar, shows up again in Sefer Bamidbar, later on in Parshas Pinchas, where Moshe thinks through the implications of his not leading the Jews into Eretz Yisrael, into the land of Israel. And he asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, Yivkod Hashem, may God appoint, God Elokei haruchos l'chol basar, the God of the spirits of all flesh, Isha Aledah, let him appoint a man over the assembly, the congregation. Again, the exact same phrase, Elokei haruchos l'chol basar. So we have a puzzle, but we also have a clue. Let me try to find something in common with the other usage of this phrase. So what does Rashi say about Elokei haruchos? He says, Lama nemar. Somewhat unusual for Rashi to actually be explicit in the question, but here he's saying, why does it say Elokei haruchos l'chol basar? What does that add? So he says, Amar lefanav, Moshe said before him, Ribbono shel olam, Master of the universe, Goloi lefanecha dato shel kol echad ve'echad. Revealed before you is the thinking of every individual. The einon domin zelaz, and they're not comparable one to the other. Manei alehem manhig shehei sovel kol echad ve'echad lefi daito. So appoint over them a leader who will be able to bear the burden of each and every one of them. So we see this Elokei haruchos echoes, at least according to the Pshat of Rashi, Rashi's explanation, it echoes the thought, if you will, back in our Parsha, in Parshas Korach, where Rashi, using slightly different language, says Yodei machshavos, who knows the thoughts. So, what does that have to do with ruchos? What does that have to do with the spirits? You know, the thoughts? Well, some actually suggest that ruchos means the neshamos. Ruach and neshama, spirit and soul, are thematically connected in describing the part of the human being that we cannot see. But if we pursue that language a little bit more, we might get a clue to what this is talking about in the context. What's ruach? We call it spirit, but we know that ruach also, in common language, means wind. Ruach is wind. The ruach apenu is the breath of our nostrils. It's the wind, if you will, that comes out of our nostrils. What is wind? Well, can we see wind? Not really. We can see the effects of wind. We can see what wind does. We can see the leaves that blow in the wind, the branches and the trees that sway in the wind, the hats that get blown off in the wind, and sailboats that are powered by the wind. We can see the effects of the wind. The wind is the cause. But we can't see the wind. We only see the effects of the wind. The hurricanes, the tornadoes. In fact, it's very difficult to understand wind and to even know where it comes from. I'm not a mathematician, so I'm a little bit out of my league here. But there is a branch of mathematics called chaos theory. And it's the study of the states of what are referred to as dynamical systems. I'm not sure why they're not just called dynamic, but that's what they're apparently called. Whose apparently random states of disorder and irregularities, I'm reading from some research I did on the internet, are often governed by deterministic laws that are highly sensitive to initial conditions. Sensitivity to initial conditions is popularly known as the butterfly effect. It's called this because of the title of a paper given by Edward Lorenz. He was a researcher in mathematics in 1972, entitled Predictability. Does the flap of a butterfly's wing in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? So the flapping wing represents a small change in the initial condition of the system, which causes a chain of events that prevents the predictability of large-scale phenomena. Had the butterfly not flapped its wings, the trajectory of the overall system could have been vastly different. There's check this out. It's a fascinating theory. This is by analogy, and our understanding of ruach as wind doesn't depend on this, but this gives it a little extra texture. So what's Moshe saying? What's Moshe's argument to God? He's saying, we as human beings, we can't possibly understand what goes into a human being's mind to determine how he acts. There are so many factors. There are so many influences over a human being. There's no way to know. No way for us to know. But you are Elokei Haruchos. As Rashi says, Yodei Amachashavos, you understand the thoughts. Perhaps more pointedly, you understand the cause and effect. Sometimes people make bad choices. Sometimes they're evil. Sometimes they're just victims. Sometimes they're just acted upon and not acting. In terms of human justice, we have no choice but to act to a certain extent in a manner that's oblivious to those considerations. We might take some of them into account, but we can hardly take all of them into account. But the Almighty can. Kadosh Baruch Hu can and does understand and judge culpability and innocence based on the ruchos, the winds that affect the human being. Now we can take this point just a little bit further, and we can say that whether or not this theory holds water of the butterfly in Brazil causing a tornado in China or Texas or an avalanche, but we certainly can sense that what appear to be very small actions, and maybe only words, can have profound effect, can have historically radically changing effect, whether for ill or for good. If a butterfly has the power to change the weather, then we, as human beings, thinking and have the capability of deliberate thought and action, how much more so do we have the possibility and the potential of creating positive change in the world by what we do, by how we treat people, by how we act, by how we represent HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his people, and just by creating the right atmosphere with even just a smile. Good Shabbos.